Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I presume on
They're
a boat.
fish.
Is that the boat of
Well,
John?
no, no, no.
Oh,
This
no.
there are fishermen who fish out on the ocean there on the beach, and so I just thought I'd get a shot of them
Oh,
fishing.
you took that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we were just have you seen this testimony of this young man accused of killing these three people from the demonstration a year ago? 17-year-old. So they've interviewed him for a few hours today, it seems, or the prosecutor. But the defense guys were making a case that he was protecting himself from the mobs, from the crowds there, and that he shot in self-defense. That someone with a gun was coming at him, and the other one lunged and kicked him with his foot or something while he was down or something. So he has all that elements of it, but the testimony of it, even though the issue seems like it normally is happening in America anyway, he was 17. He's a pudgy young guy, with the baseball hat and the t-shirt, walking around with an AK-47 in the midst of the demonstrations at the time that were kind of far left, but then they had a lot of QAnon type guys there, or guys who were defending their America. Everyone was talking about their own America, their own specific America. But for us, we would still walk through the left and the right. We would still we're in it, but not of it. And I say, why? I said, because then the people who make such a strong association with the historical self, when there are those who are meeting each other in the mystery of self. And the mystery is as simple as an accidental conversation with someone that becomes a friendship based on no history, no nothing, no rewards, but just an interaction, a shift like that. So the human sees elements on both sides that are reflective, but then sees the possessiveness of the issue, where it's not just the issue to be looked at or seen, but it's the issue that becomes a possessive of power. Whether it's this one or that one, that becomes a possessive of power. And then you see it's that power that once it literalizes as power, as self, it's like fame to some degree. It seeks to continue. So even though it's completely invented itself as having a history, but if you're hanging around generally with the characters in the story, when there's no demonstrations going on, when it's just hanging out or the everyday living, you see a thread of deep loneliness running through the story. And then you see the logical motives that they have, but it seems like the motive is coming out of a profound and loneliness, not aloneness. And I said, well, there's a difference for me in the perspective of loneliness and aloneness. Aloneness is a realization of something. It's no longer psychologically governed in the social fabric. Loneliness is the basis of a society that is based itself on profit and things like that, and continuum and competition, and that there's a normal, a literal normalcy that one must accomplish in their life. And so they'll be judged by that literal normalcy of their job or this or that, as you're human. But we also see that when one's so forced into a job as slavery, it kind of dehumanizes them in some way into a survival mode. And so those who are locked into a survival mode where they need the job, where they need this, where it becomes a need, where the job is a creative act offered. So you see it's not so, but you see the continuity around survival and the premise of survival of the self then creates a almost inherently violent dialogue where the human being somehow is that like that little toy I showed you last week of the boy with the hands in his pocket and the mask on his face, and he's in it, but he's not of it. He empathizes with the human that runs through the story, but he also is not part of the literal picture of survival. He's
Yeah.
let's say from the creative perspective or the spiritual perspective, or that one has an experience where they see life a bit differently. And in seeing life a bit differently, they may see that it's not so much literally the survival that is the thing. One is managing the survival, but you're also not having the survival dominate all aspects of the life. So the one thing that there is a survival, that means that it tries to know how to navigate through the social fabric that it's in, so that it can have a creative life. And that means if it works or it doesn't work or whatever, but it is all part of its kind of portfolio of expression, where a job is not a prison or a literalness or whatever, but is part of your creative expression. So some things have to literally happen to where one re-enters the picture. And we utilize, we'll say, John's passing a few weeks ago for you, Derek, when there was a very struggle with John's presence and your presence. Even though there was feeling and shared relationship, there was a thread that ran through it, historical thread in memory or whatever, that ran through it that one would see. But then in the passing, you're there, you're here, you see it all. And it's not a literal John or a literal you. You see that you've shared an experience. And that somehow the very literalness of the relationship denied you seeing something that was obvious until it was lost. And when it was lost or thrown away, not only was it obvious, what was hidden in plain sight, that it was missing a hey baby conversation, a deeply hey baby conversation. But but the difference with a hey baby conversation is it had to be true in some way. Somehow an instinctive sense of it being so. It's almost like hearing a baby cry or something, and immediately there's a response to something if you're in that situation. Even if you're not in that situation, there's a response to see. That's in part of your body that's responding to an aspect of something that's happening. So you see the relationship to the other, but when you perceive it as an I and thou relationship, not me and you, you see a sacred thread that runs through it naturally. And so you see the relationship to the child has a sacred thread of it that is natural. And yet others can't, the child will pick up if it's an artificial response from others. Even if it's not laid out artificially, but somehow it has a sense of trust or feeling that allows something to happen. That if you offered the same thing, it would resist. So something, a shared feeling, allows a happening to take place. And then when the shared feeling comes and one looks at the story, they don't see a literal story, they see an evocative story. And you see that once you see the human hidden in the story, there's an empathy that awakens in you. Now, empathy doesn't literalize and tell you what to do, but once it's awakened, it's touched. To me, that awakening is when it's touched, it's capable of an I and thou situation. It means that it can care for someone 1,000 miles away, or someone that's even passed away and has the same feeling, that somehow it transcends and allows one another dimension of the everyday life. And that even in deep love or deep mourning or deep loss or deep anything that touches upon a truth, it opens up a hidden dimension that shows you another dimension of what's important in the life, not only the literal survival of it, but that there are moments when you are there for the life that you've lived. And you don't see it literally or tomorrow or yesterday or whatever, you have a feeling. And you see that that feeling is a kind of second nature to you now in your actions. So when we're asking how is a creative person or a spiritual person or someone who's in the journey, how do they relate to the everyday? It's not laid out that way, because the everyday to that person is also something other than the everyday. Of course, it has everydayness in it, but it also has dimensions and reflections. And since one is related and caring for, the day becomes more of a movie to us, more of a creative process that we're in. How are you, Ursha? And so when, for you as the doula that you've been, although you're not literally practicing, it's second nature in your mind if something comes up. But let's say then that you see again the processes, that you see the processes of life happening. And you see it's all in transition. And that then now the publicity of the transition may be violent, scary, this or that, but you see it's in transition.
Yes.
And transition is not spelled out. But their transition to you is, oh, I'm going to lose my house tomorrow. Or transition to you means that I'm sick or something and I'm going. So transition comes with fear, but transition is in fact perceptively happening. And when you see transition as the perceptive happening, that life is in flux, then you see many of the issues that come are because of that flux. It's kind of a reminder, but what it does bring in fear.
Yeah.
But beyond the fear, and that's what we were discussing also the other day, one may see something and try to be better at it or use it therapeutically, but the deeper you see it, the less it belongs to you. And so that's what that oath meant, the Hippocratic oath meant, that what you see beyond this is not seen by the ego, is seen somehow by the being, because a regular person cannot see opening a body up and operating it in care. Okay, you understand? Even from oneself, one has to keep it hidden. And in fact, I think in the Talmudic Bibles that the body is not to be seen. That is something forbidden, only if you should see it or something. But there's an inherent resistance to seeing that anyway. How a body works, it would be shocking. Our own body working, we have to be spared from seeing. So let's say those who are given the normalcy of seeing that, then they take an oath in themselves to do no harm or something, not to use the information, not to abuse it. Of course, that's been damaged. Not to make a buck off it, not to make a buck off a person's fear or hurt or whatever. Lots of luck. But you see, the original premise was, if you see something beyond the normalcy, you're kind of taking an oath. The oath is, or a vow, and the vow is that you're having a conversation with no one else about this except those who have also shared it with you. You're not bringing it home to your kids or your family or whatever in that situation. You know what? I opened up a guy today, right? Okay. So you're bringing home a happy face while this experience is overwrought. And you see that there is an oath. And the oath is not exactly laid out in a person's life, but it is somehow, when you are experiencing dying or phases of dying, literally, in people that you're caring for, you then see dying in the story. And you see how much time is left, how much this, you you figure it according to your own mathematics. If it's medical mathematics, you see the relative health of the body and how many more years or months they have or whatever, or what they need to do if they want to continue. All of this naturalizes and normalizes. That somehow you could enter into the picture and somehow shift the picture, change the picture, organize the picture, project the further picture of the life. Okay. And you've done that, Urja, haven't you? You've had a few different expressions. We all have. But again, when you see the depth of it, you return to the story from a different place. And when you see death and dying and living as inherently part of a happening, and you perceive that because you've seen it, and you're seeing it, and then somehow, after seeing it in another, you walk past the mirror and all of a sudden, holy shit, you just saw the ghost of you. And caring for that in the other. And when giving them a reading, when you're giving them the reading, then you're saying that they're not only this crazy person that you see in front of them, but somehow there's an inner spirit and dimension that you're talking to. And they're not just this dopey character that you see. Doesn't look that spiritual. All that. Give it a smack in the head. Okay. But all of a sudden, and I say, is it true? Is it bullshit at the same time that it's holy? That somehow, no matter what level the person has seen, if you visit them at home, they're having an argument with their husband or their wife, or the kids won't listen to it, something like that, and they say, holy shit, it's like visiting Jesus's house. And you see all of us, you see the story differently now. You see 12 young men, unemployed, hanging around the house, and the mother's yelling at them to get a job and get married or something like that. So you see normalcy. And yet somehow, with the person, you're able to visit another dimension. And then the literacy is there. And the literacy is what? That you are protecting those who you love from the very thing that you've just seen. So you come home happy, haha, how you doing? Let's go take a vacation or something like that. But you also understand that the normalcy of your life, and so therefore you have an overprotective life of the family to some degree to make sure that they have a life and that you have a life also.
Yeah.
Because you know that you are committed completely to whatever happens in the circumstance you're in.
Yes.
Holy shit. That one would still feel compelled to care. When you see all the facets of one's makeup. And we also understand, we don't understand literally what care means. But it does seem to mean when the ego surrenders its hold or its possessiveness of the life, of the story, and that event takes place that touches you to such an extent that you surrender your attitude of who you are and what you're doing and where you're going. And you're there for it. Normally. Even though there's no description of how to get there and what happens to your body, how does the body get to wholeheartedness? Is it just a feeling that you have and then all of a sudden the body follows? Traditionally, it's been that way, hasn't it been? If you had a feeling, the body seems to go along with it. But now let's say the body is us, not some abstraction of us. And that there is somehow a conversation that happens with one's own living, with one's own self, that is not literal, but is evocative, where somehow the losing of it is only the losing of the possessiveness of it. That you can say to the body, okay, get up now and go. And the body says, who are you telling to get up now? I don't want to get up now. So you have a body that says, Okay, should we go out? And the body says, I don't want to go out. Let's take it easy for a while and drink. Okay. So the body all of a sudden, which it's doing anyway, comes into the story and starts even telling you what to watch. Netflix. The body says, no, I want to see, okay, a different series. So is it possible that once the body is awakened, it's no longer the body, but it is you in some way? Okay. So we kid around with segue. All of a sudden, as you saw here when you were here, Derek, all of a sudden, segue has become a sage. He could tell you, oh, you put the lime in the coconut, you do this, and this one's a phony, this one's bullshit, this one is a god, this was. He was pretty hip with all that.
Yeah,
He had his own thing going.
He had his way with it, for sure.
So what's the one thing that stops all of you all? Is a girlfriend gives you a hit in the head. And then you find out you ain't all that. No matter who you think you are. You're just another schmo with a viewpoint.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is that okay? But then a schmo with a viewpoint, it happens to be a beauty in it. And I say, why? Because I'm seeing a transformation take place of a goodness happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We had to trick it and do all this and that, you know what I mean? But I'm seeing a dopey shift taking place where people are, checking on each other, how they're doing and this and that. And there's an affection going on that we're, in the past, I think the art was used to kind of avoid the thing at the same time, but it would have to come through osmosis. I think then the movement here and the room and then the interaction with all of you.
Yeah.
For me, I'm around this kind of environment of realization. You know what I mean? And realization as an aha moment that the very thing you were living in is also revealed. And you discover that it's a kind of spiritual or holy thing that you've been living in at the same time has been normal. And it's not so much, it's because of your capacity to perceive it. That part of your being must awaken in order you to perceive those other dimensions. Because in the regular world of survival, those dimensions that are hidden to us become psychological and are hidden. In the creative world, where one is not only the survival self, but one is also a creative being, then you utilize those very dimensions that one would run away from if they were trying to survive. And I say, what is survival? Let's say I'm in the army and I come up against something where there's a very great difference between you and me if we're fighting. And we're fighting for some cause, not something that you did to me or I did to you, but some cause you did or you, okay. So let's say that in that you discover something. That somehow you had to have a literalness in the situation, but then you ran into the human aspect of what you were doing. You as a jerk not only cut them, but was so concerned when you cut them that you tried to stop the blood and help them. And this, what a jerky soldier you would be that you tried to, you tried to help the person that you hurt in that way. Okay. So you see the mix, you could see the duality of the experience. The human, if they saw a hurt person in the street, may care for them. And but that also is there in you as a person, if you are there in a battlefield or there in that situation, and yet you have that background where the training doesn't overcome that feeling. They call it PTSD, but it's not PTSD, it's the human remembers.
Mm. Mm.
The memory is not your torment, the memory is reaching your humanity.
Mm.
And it's not buying the story that you have to shut it up so you can get a job and come back to the world. Some shitty things went down that you had to see. And not only you get past the guilt of it as a trip of it, but you see the depth of it. And you see, when you see the depth of it, you see that you haven't lived your life at all yet. That is the experience you have. The perception goes so deeply in the story that you see almost at the beginning, the first aspect of your life has been a kind of rehearsal. The next aspect of your life is no longer karmic or historically driven, but that you enter into the story from a different place. And it becomes then you understand the creative aspect of life has been going on all along in a hidden way anyway. But you then understand the creative dimension of life is not literal time, it's evocative time. You then return to the story with the capacity to see it from a different place. And it's a rare gift for a moment to see what you've been doing all this time from that perspective of the observer or the energy looking at the story that you're in. When you get a glimpse of the energy looking at the story, you see a story with a whole different thing. It doesn't have a sort of literal beginning and an end that way. It has dimensions in it. And that somehow with that perception, you are free. In fact, the story you're in only makes sense because you are a free human being. Now, free to, free from, the from and the to's, you're just free. Nothing binds you that is not human. And so they say, well, what do you do? And I say, I don't know that the doer is so important yet. It's the perception of it. Because you see that somehow in your own perceptive freedom, you've been teaching freedom in some way as a byproduct of what you're doing or earning or living or surviving or whatever. You see that somehow you've been teaching or alerting people to another dimension of their life that they intuit, but in relationship to you, it's a shared experience. That the other dimension of the life is the real friendship, not so much the literalness of survival. And so you start to see that deeply the life is a creative expression. As you're living it, the everyday, you can see yourself almost putting it together and inventing it or organizing it.
Easy.
Yes. Now, there was some article today about, or a famous writer. What's the famous woman's writer from the past? But it's on Apple or something. But I think there's 3 seasons of this famous woman's writer's life.
Yeah.
While she was living it. But it had in the New York Times. It was so sweetly said. How sensitive it was. So we'll see. But we were just so. Have you seen that new movie of?
Dominic.
No, that cowboy. There's a.
No, I haven't.
A black cowboy movie with the same fellow that.
Idris Elba.
Yeah, with Regis Elba. But then the other fellow is the fellow who's living here and going out with a friend of ours there for a while. The fellow who's the star of the movie. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, but
you know what they did ask was they asked you to please see it again. Most of us thought it was two shoot 'em up and 2 killers, and but it was all black Western, but vengeance and this and that. Okay, so then in the paper he said, please look at it again. It's not about that, and so he was looking at it from so we looked at it again yesterday. And then after that, we watched the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was much better, I thought. You know, but we all looked at it
It's a nice tone.
because Segway said it had that one sound that you couldn't recreate. That yeah, you know that sound in the Good.
I
and
love
Bad,
that
and
sound.
Ugly? Yeah, and yeah, that one sound that came out of that movie just knocks you out
Yes,
and tells you the whole sound. So it's very
it
cool.
comes from another dimension, it feels.
So I don't know. We're seeing a country, a circumstance in flux. The flux has always had a variation going on there, but we see the literalization of attitude, the literalization of, let's say, your history being your poetry. It literalizes. Okay. But you also do see a kind of profound loneliness running through the story. And then even in the relationships, you see loneliness running through it.
Yeah.
And I read something that the woman mentioned. We've been together 20 years. We haven't slept for 10 years together. And he says, and he gives me such a hard time about bringing him in his room. He's staying in the bed all day. Okay. And I say, holy, you have what you, and I say, yeah, right. You understand how the literalness of the story takes place where you become an object. And then it's in the loss that you see another dimension.
Yeah.
So you see that you're invited to see dimensions of your own life only when you're ready for it.
Mm.
Because it needs a kind of quality of being to see it. Because you say, look, you look at this diary and you're going to all of a sudden see something that's going to change your history. And you're going to say, why? Your mother said that she really didn't want you at that time. And you say, oh shit, mommy, why'd you do that? Okay. And I say, you know how tough it was? She was how old she was broken. Okay. Can you give her that? And I say, holy shit, thanks for hanging out that long then.
Holy shit, yeah.
So let's say, holy shit again.
Yes.
You see the life from the sadhana. You see the normal life from the perspective of the journey. And you also see that the people who put you together, whatever, had their own life going. And that they were also longing, they were also yearning, they were also doing whatever. And you see the thread that runs through it, no matter what the circumstances, a kind of loneliness that runs through it. And the loneliness seems to have a hurt around it. You would say that Jesus in the manger was evidence of a kind of loneliness if you're in a certain circumstance, where there's a deep loneliness where you're not visible to the rest of the population, or you're avoided or something like that. So that there's a thread, or you perceive it that way. And there is, I think, a thread like that, whether it literalizes or not. But it seems to run through the whole story. And it doesn't seem to be done away with having a fortune or this or that, or having this situation or that situation, or doing mantras or whatever. It seems to me that there's a moment of experience waiting, where you see the difference between illusion and delusion. The way they described it, I think, in the English dictionary is to cry at the movie is illusion, to throw your shoe at the villain in the movie is a delusion. To cry at the movie is to experience a creative act. But then to throw the shoe at the villain in the movie is to literalize the act. So that's the description of delusion, illusion becoming delusion, when you act on it and it becomes owned by, because the illusion wasn't owned by the ego. It was touched. But
Oh,
then
that's a nice
once the ego owns it, it acts on it, so it then plays out its history. So the experience becomes a possessive, and as it becomes a possessive, the premise is it dumbs itself down. Because the creative act is always a shared experience.
Oh, Danny, that just described that in a way I never understood before. That's nice.
Once it, well, then once you start to see that, you see almost the whole creative dimension in your own existence, and there's an aha waiting for you. In whatever normal situation you're in, you see the normalcy of the situation is almost a movie that you're in. And that as you see the creative act, you see it came out of not illusion in the way that it's bad or good, but like falling in love illusion.
Yeah.
And then they say to you, hold it. When you fell in love, you didn't check out to see how much was in the bank account and what the guy was going to do and what his record and what his family thought. And so those are the thinkers. And you say, I would never have thought of checking all that out. Somehow we just ran with the feeling. Okay. So you see illusion. Then illusion becomes delusionary as then those very things that it didn't experience, that the parents told it had to do. You had to see if he had a job. You had to see if it had this. You had to see. Okay. Start to become your reality. The very thing that the family was yelling at you for starts to become the literalization of the situation. So you see where the feeling, the illusion, then literally became a delusion. It became karmic. Where in fact the feeling freed you from the literal story. Then it literalized again and became part of the thing to the extent that the feeling was squeezed out of the story. And you have the literal. But every time the literal tries to shift or change, it experiences what it originally felt. That somehow, even though the beginnings of the love affair may have been schmucky, they were true. In some dopey way.
Yeah.
The person or the people put aside all their stuff about logic and this and that. Okay. That a feeling somehow showed you that there's another dimension that's very strongly happening in life. And when you get to the surface and the survival dimensions start to dominate, and so you repress these other so-called dopey feelings, which gave it meaning in order towards the survival. And they say once the survival mode is there, it becomes meaner. It becomes more focused on survival and less trusting of these other feelings. What a weird life. But it seems natural. It seems then as you lose the feelings and it literalizes, that there's a moment in time where you start to miss it. You start to become aware that your circumstances without that feeling shared.
Yeah.
And as it's without that feeling shared, you see almost everything that happens in it is without that feeling shared. It's literal in some way. But you also see that your presence has meaning. Not the literalness or whatever, but a reminder of something else. That how much ever the story literalizes or becomes this or that, it's not that way for you. You are, no matter how, you can't go along with something that's absolutely dehumanizing. Even if you try to go along with it, it won't work. You'll get sick. You have to pee. Something happens. Your body will save you from selling yourself out in some way. They won't believe you anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me see. Try to sell yourself out, or like, please, sir, I do something like that. Can you pull that? You should be able to do that, sir. Please. You want to get a job at 7-Eleven? Do they have 7-Elevens throughout the country there? Or dollar store? You want to get a job at the dollar store?
You talking to me?
Yeah. You wouldn't take it, Derek, even just to have the whole experience of working at the dollar store?
I mean, I don't
Problem
know. I
is
don't
the
think
fluorescent lights, isn't it?
that's part of it for sure.
Boy, they say that people die 10 years earlier if you go to the dollar store because of
I believe that.
the lights that they're using there are so radioactive.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Okay, should we call it a day today? Has anyone else been on with us, or has that just been us goofing together?
Jimmy Diaz
Okay,
and
Jimmy, hi.
Michael, what is your name, Michael? I forget.
Bravo.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, say hello. I hope this is okay. This kind of just this atmosphere where it's, in my mind's eye, it's inherently a creative milieu that we have. And that anything that we're introducing into it, even the literal stuff, we can see the difference between crying at the movie, which is a whole heart, which is a feeling that reaches you beyond your defenses and touches you. And then the illusion becomes delusionary when you start to act on it and literalizes. So that was a premise of a love affair then becoming a thing. And then the thingness survived. Where in the beginning stages, survival was not so much in the story. At a certain stage, survival became the dominant aspect of the story. But it was felt at the point as when it becomes survival, it squeezes out the original feeling where it's missing. So there is a secret longing in each person when the feeling that brought it to the story is then missing into the thingness of the story. And no matter how much they try to therapeutic and make it act as if it's wrong, in fact, it's not wrong. The feeling has fallen away. The very thing that created it, also once it's some issue cuts it, then if it was a creative thing that you put together, then it lacks that, it becomes a survival thing. Things can happen in the survival dimension that cannot happen in the loving dimension. Because the surviving dimension becomes inherently competitive, while the loving dimension is a cooperative in nature. It doesn't, it can share deeply. So as it literalizes, it starts to lose the thread of a feeling. And I think then it becomes, the literal aspect of that is intense loneliness, which has underpinnings of violence to it because it looks like it's being caused, or that they're plotting against you, that there's a big plot against you. And you'll find evidence of that, but at the same time, when you literalize it, you miss the point that as you go deeper, you start to see that people are just people, man. When you look deeper, you see that they're too stupid to have ever. You see the thread that's running through the story is different. You're no longer bound to the conspiracy. You see that inherently in the person, they're running away from the very thing that they're seeking. So you see that the premise of loneliness as an object towards something, one then tries to create a whole lifestyle of anti-loneliness, of filling it up with this and that or whatever, where you see the thread running through it. The dimension of discovery is in the aloneness. You have a moment of discovery where you re-enter the story, no longer coming from identity history. You see that you are then coming more from a history, that the identity doesn't own the story. And that there has always been a dimension of your existence that is parallel to you, that is hidden in plain sight until an event happens that reveals it. And it's usually a broken heart. But when you see the determination to have the broken heart in the person is not only a psychological one, but somehow, no matter how much advice, no matter how much this, don't do this, you see the person will sneak out the bathroom window to have that broken heart. I would say then the broken heart is not exactly a broken heart, but it takes you to a place where the mind can't go. The broken heart to me is almost seeing the life from the mirror, looking into the story without the history, where you see the mystery of your life. And you see an aspect of the mystery of your life as a history on one level, but is not the only level of your life. So when they're talking about death, literally, they're talking about the historical death. They're not talking about the mystery death. You see the mystery running through the story doesn't have the literalness of the self as possessive ownership or whatever. It has the experience as its life, that it consciously understands that it's come into the body to have an experience of what it means to be alive. So there is our premise is that there's a moment waiting that starts the story from a different place, not as a possessive, but more as if, when I say angel enters into your body and has the experience, it's very much like acting on a deep level, where you assume the character and you assume their history without being dominated by the history. You see that the history is more of a mystery to you creatively. When an act happens to you, it shifts the life into a creative act. Then you see things that happen, the interactions that happen to you, even the accidents. You may think something and see something on the screen as you walk past, or someone, you may read something that's just, so you start to see the simultaneity happening for you. And then you see, as you have experiences, you're meeting people who are in a similar neighborhood of that experience. So when the life starts to increasingly become creative and you become less relevant to the literalness of your world, you start to see that all your interactions have a creative dimension to them. And what looks like accident is in fact a shared moment. So then the life is not that you are doing creatively this or that, but in fact, as you are moving, you are navigating a life. You're exploring a life, which is very difficult to do in our world because earning a living or surviving is the predominant one.
Hmm.
So those who are free to explore the life, and the fact that their living comes out of that exploration and the genuineness of their exploration, is like a desire for the genuineness in your music or your art or whatever. And inwardly, the attempt not to sell it out. So you perceive that the life that you're in, to some extent, is almost a movie that you're watching. Your relationship to your life is almost as if you're sitting in the front seat watching the movie of you, something you wouldn't see while you're in it, but something that you would see, and you see through all the meditation and all the structure is trying to get a glimpse of what is there. And you see that something has to happen. There has to be some kind of purity without being spelled out what that is, for you to see the essence of your own existence. But having seen it, you see a history and mystery simultaneously taking place. But seeing it, you're no longer dominated by the history of self. The story is released. And so you see that it doesn't literally mean this or that nationality, background, race, it's not literally you. There is a you that is none of these things. And that is the you between us in relationship. There is a you who's not French. There's a you who's not white. There's a you who's not, okay. And then there's the you who has those characteristics. But the judgment of you is not a judgment of literalness. It's the relationship sees the picture from a different place. The friendship sees the picture from a different place. Sees when it's captured by the story that it's in. When you can't reach your friend any longer because the story that they're in has captured them. You know what I mean? Radicalizes them, and there's a loss of the feeling. So that premise of to be touched is to the illusion of it, touches you deeply. And in fact, I think when we were kids, movies did affect us very strongly. I think I even, as a kid, joined the Navy. I did a lot of things that just from watching movies. And you imagine that what it was going to be like was from the movie that you saw, you know. But movies did inspire at that time naively, very strongly. But then in retrospect, it does seem movie-like. Where you could flash back 50 years or 20 years or 20 minutes or whatever, where you see almost an entirely creative process. Okay, anything else happening then, Derek? No other news out there?
Danny,
Yeah.
I think it's on the internet. There is a filmmaker called Jeff Moss who did a documentary called Mayor Pete. And he followed him when he campaigned, but there seems to be a spiritual element that I've never seen in around politics. It sounds like it should be interesting. And
Mayor,
it's on
what is it called? On
It's
what?
called Mayor Pete.
Mayor Pete.
By
Okay.
Jeff Moss. Jeff Moss is a filmmaker. And it sounded fascinating the way it happened, and it becomes a very
Well,
human.
I'll get this other one. Hang on.
Made me want. I think it's on Amazon, or Amazon or HBO Plus. I don't know. Jeff Moss.
Yeah, I couldn't find the other one. Okay.
We watch one movie a week, and it's usually a kid's movie.
Well, and how are you doing then, Derek? What's happening for you?
All is well at the moment. I'm
You've
just
still been exploring this bit. Now you have left me with this Bravo. Or is it Brave or Brave?
brave.
What am I to do? Do you know what that is, Kai?
No.
Brave browser?
It's a web browser, decentralized web browser. So with blockchain technology is underlying it. So
Oh, I never heard of it.
yeah,
It has a picture of a lion on it here, and it's called Brave Browser.
yeah.
So,
It keeps,
so they don't get all your.
right information. It keeps your trackers from putting cookies on your machine and all of that. So it keeps it. I think the cleanliness of your computer is helped by it. So, and also your browsing.
We'll have to find someone, I guess, maybe Mary or someone will look at it a bit further and see what it is.
Yeah, they remove a lot of the advertisements. If you go to websites, sometimes you're just dominated by all these advertisements, and so that cleans up a lot of that. So it makes your browsing experience better. The downside would be, like, Joan likes to browse on Google because she likes being tracked from a shopping perspective, so that she can get advertised to things that she didn't know she wanted, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I like to use Brave just to browse. I'll shop on Google Chrome, but then browse in general in Brave.
Okay, no, there will be. And how are you doing with it, Kai?
With what?
With this crypto idea lately? There's been a lot of news lately around it and this and that.
Yeah, I haven't been involved at all.
You haven't been involved. I actually try to trick people to get involved. That's why, because I can't imagine. Because why? And I say, I really can't with a straight face pursue a buck that way or try to make a buck or something like that. Somehow in this phase of the life, it has to come to you in a certain way. So I like the idea of crypto to see if there were people like us engaged in keeping a naturalness between themselves somehow, before these other guys capture it and make it into another business thought. I'm still thinking it as a way then of caring, you know what I mean? Of just what we're doing naturally anyway, where people are sharing their lives and their circumstance and looking out for each other. So I was then looking for a marketplace like that looks out for each other. And I see some of it is happening out there or whatever. Some of the people who are now making new lives, they're growing things that They want it to be this way or that way. They shared farms or shared neighborhoods or feelings or whatever. So more and more, there seems to be personal communities cropping up that share a feeling.
Mhm.
And so I was trying to excite that, maybe in Seth, maybe in Rafi, whatever. They hooked up with the polluting idea strongly. That was a kind of turnoff, that it was a major
Oh,
pollutant, you know, even more than anything else was supposedly a major pollutant. And okay.
huh.
Uh, so my premise again was the just an exploration of something that frees the story up a little bit. But as far as I understand, I'm also seeing a world that is Bitcoinish. When I look at a bank, they don't have actual cash there. They have, it's just numbers, and you know, just like they, okay, it's not that they have the money. They'll have it when you need it and you want to take it out or something, but it's all transactions and situations that
Yeah.
are going on generally. So the more I look at anything, I see it to be Bitcoinish. I've utilized the banks to some degree when we needed to.
Mhm.
But it's been more of a place that, you know, holds the cash together or your funds together or whatever. But it does seem to me that the Bitcoin aspect has dimensions of the same thing. The only thing is it allows
Mhm.
transactions to take place without it being organized.
Right.
Hmm?
Right.
But they have been already doing that with the wealthy anyway. There is a
Mhm.
law that says if you sell something for $10 million and you made a profit, you can put that profit into some other things and then build an empire and
Mhm.
then pay the taxes years in the future. If you can utilize that profit that you've made to build an empire, the taxes that you don't pay in order to do. So they've been doing that with people, and that happens over, I think, $500,000 to $1 million or more. Those transactions take place. So everyone is, there are thousands of people who are taking advantage of these laws that had to make some sense at one point, where the tax would have crippled your business. They allowed you to reinvest the tax money in your business
Mhm.
and to make it healthier or whatever like that. So how are you now with Bitcoin? You still okay with it?
Me,
Yeah.
yeah, I think Bitcoin is probably the only one that doesn't have that. Or, I mean, like you can organize within Bitcoin, but you can't organize Bitcoin itself. It seems to be free of that, you know. So anybody can participate, you know. And they keep on printing up trillions of dollars too, right? So there's that concern of hyperinflation, and they're inflating the value of the money that you do have away, whereas Bitcoin will store that value for you, you know. So. You know, if you can see like a doing, I mean, I guess I kind of have a doom and gloom outlook of that, you know, where I don't know that I trust politicians to juggle everybody's lives.
No,
So,
it seems to me you can trust the politicians to continue the story. To me, I kind of look at the face of the person to see if, you know, how moral they are in their hearts or something like that. Is that too dumb?
I don't think so.
I mean, but in this situation, you see that there are some of these guys like grandpas or nice guys or something like that, or whatever. And then you see that there's some that are pretty ruthlessly out to make a buck or do their thing. Or, okay. And so then we were discussing with Segway when he was talking the conspiracy to me this morning. And I said, you know, I told you again, the doctor said, when you see the dog shit over there in the corner, you don't have to philosophize about whether you should eat it or you shouldn't eat it or what to, you see it to be shit. When you see the thing to be shit, the conspiracy, everything falls away. It's just your perception sees the story, not the literalness of the story, but the inhumanity of the story. So you see that you're being hustled. And I say, what would hustle be? Did you see the girl that was saved today in the newspapers? That she went from the car, she had a thing on TikTok where she made a sign out the car window like that and then covered up with, first it was like that, and then it's like this, or it's like this, and then it's like that. You cover the thumb, I'm being held captive. From
Oh,
TikTok. So she
wow.
went out the window and people driving past in the car. This guy took her. She was 16. He was about 50 or 60, I think. But he took her over five or six states, and she made believe she was waving, but she was using this TikTok symbol.
Wow.
I'm captured. And they found her and they saved her and so on like that. But the cops said they never heard of it. But so many people did hear of it. They watched TikTok, I guess. You know? So they saved the girl today from that symbol that she was using. So is it weird out there?
That's pretty weird that someone could take someone against their will. Pretty darn weird.
Yeah. And that they have to figure a way out of it.
Yeah, that's, ugh.
I think that's not uncommon.
That's kind of a miracle what happened.
Yeah. But happens here pretty much. You're starting to see shootouts in cars, and they say now that there's so many guns on the street that have been freed here or something like that, and now there's so much drugs. So young kid gangs running around is what they mean. I haven't seen any of it. It still looks like a normal world from where we are, you know, or to some degree, it's still a sane world. But how's it look for you, Kai? Does it seem dangerous, or does it still seem okay?
Where I'm sitting, it seems fine. But when I hear stories like that, I just wonder, why are we, I don't know. It
And
just,
those are regular people.
it's hard to conceive of those kinds of acts. I just,
No. When it gets cheesy, it's cheesy. And it's, but you see that that's attempting to become the norm. So there is a movement where that was normal, but now it is in fact, you see a flux taking place. Sometimes it'll get caught up in the story, literally, but I think that there is a pressure to humanize, you know, and that the events that are happening are forcing a kind of humanization of the circumstance. At the same time, it's forcing war and fights and conspiracies. My feeling is that our threat is with the flux of humanity is taking place. Okay, I'll see you then. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow night then. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
all right, thank you, Danny.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
We'll see you
Thanks,
soon.
Danny.
Bye.
There's Segway just came in.
Hi,
Hi,
Segway.
He
Hi, John Boy.
he's the guy with the hoodie. You know, the guy. What do you say? What do you say, Ursula? What should we do with this dude? He's been for 100 years now. He's been out there. What do you think? One more. We'll give it one more year then.
It's a keeper.
Day by day. We'll take it day by day.
We'll take it day by day then. Okay.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank
Take care.
you.
See you,
We'll see you later. Take
See
care.
ya. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.